Hello, is this Gary?
Yeah, this is Gary. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Gary. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I want to welcome you to Late Night in the Midlands. And we do have, I've got you on. I've got, I believe, Shannon. Is this Shannon who's with us?
Yes.
Hi, Shannon.
Yes, this is me.
Okay.
Hi, Michael.
Hi. It's great to have you guys on the show. Thank you. And now Gabrielle is the last. Now, should I call Gabrielle or will Gabrielle be calling in?
It's a guy, Gabriel.
Oh, okay.
I assume he's calling in.
Okay. All right, great. So I'm ready to get started if you are. And I thought maybe we could start and you could tell us a little bit about the symposium that you're going to have going.
I can definitely do that.
All right, great.
Well, you know, the wonderful thing is that we have both Rupert Sheldrake and Graham Hancock with us, and you know, those are both of the band's TED Talks together in one place, and we're actually going to have a panel on the Friday night after Rupert's keynote, his first keynote. He's doing two, but there's a panel on the Friday night where he and Graham will be hosted by Gabriel Roberts, and they're going to have a conversation, you know, just starting at least with the TED events and the banning by TED and all that, and then going from there into, you know, into everything else beyond that. You know, the way that their work unfolds beyond, you know, the reaction to it from the community and beyond the TED events.
Okay, great. And I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time on the website today, and what a great bunch of speakers that you're going to have at this event. And this topic is just absolutely fascinating to me. It's something that I've been getting into a lot more the last several months. And personally, I feel like if we could figure out the consciousness, we could probably figure out anything. So I thought maybe we could start with maybe each one of you can give your own answer as to what your understanding of human consciousness is.
That's a great question. You know, there's a brand new video that is just out on YouTube on Deepak Chopra's channel, and he interviewed Rupert Sheldrake and his wife Jill Peirce, who's also speaking at the symposium and presenting her wonderful work on healing through the voice. But he interviewed Rupert, and they talked about the fact that, you know, consciousness and what consciousness is, and you know what creativity is, you know, really the ultimate mystery, and that we really don't know. And that's, you know, that's the kind of position that I think we're really open to exploring in the symposium, and in the energy of all the speakers is, you know, an openness to mystery and an openness to the unknowing. And I think, you know, one of the pitfalls of the culture that we're living in is it thinks it needs to have all the answers all the time, and so it tends to oversimplify, and it tends to, you know, encourage folks to want to think that the answer they have is the ultimate and right answer, when in fact, you know,
right. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because all too often I will have a guest on the show who they swear they've got it. They know, and there is no other answer. It's what they say and what they say only. So it's
right.
It's music to my ears to hear that.
Shannon, do you want to take your shot about what you think consciousness is all about?
Certainly. You know, I certainly agree with Gary that it's in the suspension of arriving at a conclusion where we actually discover things. And as a psychotherapist, you know, a great deal of what has maybe gotten the profession a bad rap is this know-it-all attitude or reductionist attitude. And, you know, the area that I'm exploring in my practice as just a therapist is helping people kind of bring consciousness more directly into their physical body and actually helping them employ it instead of just embarking on a spiritual bypass and just contemplate.
I see. Okay, and I do believe that we have, well, maybe we do. Let's see here. We've got another one. Oh, we might have lost. Did we lose somebody or? Okay, who's with us right now?
Hi, a new person just joined. My name is Natalie.
Okay, Natalie, are you calling in with a question?
No, I'm sorry. I thought that I could listen to the interview from this phone number. Is that not true?
No. What you'd have to do is go over to latenightinthemidlands.com and you could listen there on the website.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, all right, and I do believe we have Gabrielle. Gabrielle, is it? Gabrielle with us. Huh. All right, something happened here. No, it figures. It's Monday, folks. It's Monday. All right, folks. Let me take a break, and we'll try to get this thing fixed. I don't know what's going on. Somehow. Oh, there we go. Okay. Somehow everything paused up here on the phone line, so I'm trying my best to get it back. No, not working. Ay. Okay, let's see here. All right, we're trying to get this back.
Hello?
Okay,
Yeah.
I think
hey,
we're
Michael.
back now. Hi, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I'll tell you.
That's all right.
But Shannon, I'm sorry. You were explaining your idea of consciousness, and I think at the end, I don't know if you stopped or got cut off. So
It seems like it got cut off. But
okay. All right. Well.
Yeah, but ultimately, the symposium is, pretty much edge walking and trailblazing to explore this, because it's clearly imperative at this point that as a species we need to be exploring this final frontier.
Okay, great. And now, based on your understanding of human consciousness, do you believe that all living organisms have consciousness, or at least some level of?
Yeah, absolutely, just different.
Yeah. Okay, what about you, Gary? Did we lose him?
This is Gabriel Roberts.
Oh, okay, now we're missing Gary. Oh, this is great. All right, well, hang on a second. Let me see if I could get him back on with us. Oh, Autumn, I miss you. Huh? I'm sorry, what was that?
It's a party.
Yeah, it is. All right, well, bear with me for a second and let me get him back on with us. I don't know what happened. Just the phone lines went crazy there for a second, and we've gained people and lost people. All right. Let's see. I'll just have to edit this part out when I submit it to other networks, I guess. All right, here we go. Let's see if we can add him now and not have a problem. There we go.
Hello.
Hi, Gary. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I wonder what happened.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't even know what happened. I went to answer a call, and then everything just went batty on me. So I guess my next question was, based on your understanding of human consciousness, do you believe all living organisms have consciousness? And yes or no, and then why?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. The answer for me is definitely yes. And the wonderful thing about Rupert's work is he's a plant biologist, and his love and interest in the plant world and the animal world, just pervades his whole work. And And in the Chopra video that I was mentioning before, he describes the start of his work and the start of his interest in morphic resonance and the notion that, a kind of consciousness extends throughout the plant and animal world. That was there from, his undergraduate, early days. And, he's been very interested in plants and animals the whole time. And it's, one of the ways that, one of the things that fascinated him was that you cannot get to, the different forms that a plant makes. I mean, all the cells in a plant are the same kind of cells. They're the same chemistry. Yet you get the stalk and the flower and the different parts of the plant. And, chemistry cannot explain that. So, he believes that there's, what he calls morphoenergetic fields. And, the notion for me is certainly clear that, throughout Rupert's work, it's really about documenting the ways that consciousness extends through plants, through animals, and through ourselves. And I would really recommend to your listeners that are interested in this question, look at Rupert's two books. One is called The Sense of Being Stared At, and the other one is called Dogs to Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. And in both those books, you get a sense of the objective evidence that we have for these things. The title case of From Dogs to Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, which is really about animal consciousness throughout different examples. With dogs knowing when their owner's coming home, they actually videotape the dogs in these trials. And what they found is that the animals would go to the door to await the owner, not when they heard some close by sound, not when the car was in the driveway, but at the moment that the owner decided that they were turning towards home. So that sense of purpose and intention with that motion connected with the creature that they're emotionally bonded with. And that's a tremendously interesting and very different worldview from the one that the materialist reductionists are trying to sell us. And another example I would encourage people to think about, and that he describes in that book, are, when you see murmurations and these flocks of beautiful birds all moving in one thing. Well, we know when you film those and look at it and really study the film, that there is no way that their biology could be communicating the signals fast enough to coordinate that movement in that way. It's simply impossible to explain that beautiful coordination via simple, biology. The only accurate way to think about it is through a shared psychic field, which explains not only the coordination but the beauty, as far as I'm concerned. And that's where you end up with a lot of these questions about consciousness, is in this place of the heart and the place of beauty. And, that's very satisfying as well for folks that have really been looking at this for a long time to end up somewhere like that. Shannon, do you want to share your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're really beginning to discover is that although, our biology is certainly quote unquote wired to do some communication, it's actually just a transmission and reception system for this, bigger field that Gary was talking about, that Sheldrake has explored and done great writing on. And we know that even trees that are neighboring each other will send nutrition to other trees that they are sensing are not getting enough, whether that's water or minerals in the soil. So there's this symbiotic relationship between everything that is existing, and consciousness itself is, I would say as a psychotherapist, as a human being, is our practice of becoming more aware of how our body can attune to this thing that's clearly a lot bigger than just our biological, earth suit that we're walking around in.
Yeah, and I think the point of a lot of folks that study this where you end up is with the realization that, as Rupert says, our experience of consciousness, or our consciousness, the correct metaphor for our awareness and our sensory intake is not of the video camera. The correct metaphor for our unit of consciousness that we experience as our personal self is more like a receiver, a TV receiver, a radio receiver. We're in the field of consciousness all the time, and so are plants, and so are animals, and so is everything. And, that notion is an ancient notion, and it's one that certainly the Chinese were writing about with the Tao and the I Ching, but is throughout the ancient knowledge of the world. That notion is pervasive. And when you look at the phenomenon of something like synchronicity, it's very clear that there's these ways that the universe is taking delight in the creation of consciousness, bringing events and people into coordination, such as, consciousness is advanced and meaning is advanced, and that, most often with those synchronistic events, there's an emotional core there that is the present. Jung said that, there's no such thing as a synchronicity without feeling. Feeling is psychic mass. It's the weight of things. It's how important they are to us. So, it's a very radical and different notion to view that, the world could be bringing events into coordination in response to our emotional selves. And that's, again, we come back to, this beautiful way of understanding the world, as opposed to the sort of dead, lifeless, random, argument that, the reductionists are trying to sell.
Right. And Mr. Roberts, might you have an opinion on this as well?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
They covered things so well. I would say that one of the arguments that is kind of a precursor to this argument, or to this discussion, is there's kind of the hardline debate, as if there were a line drawn in the sand, like these are the materialists, these are the non-materialists. Mm-hmm. And I think that the motivation behind these concepts is key. I think that on one hand, we can believe what we believe, but we can also separate ourselves from those things and do our best to have a proper scientific way of observing things. And if we do that, then we can look at basic experiments like the ones that have already been talked about, and other ones that have been cited that seem to show that there is something going on beyond just the mind. If I could, real quick, I had the luck of interviewing Dr. Sheldrake for my recent book, The Quest for Gnosis. And in it, he talked about an experiment that was done at Tufts by Michael Levin. And what they did was they trained some flatworms to respond to light in a particular manner. And once they've learned these particular things, they cut the heads off of the worms, effectively removing their brains. And these particular worms can grow back brains. And once they grow back the brains, what they have learned is remembered. So it's one of those things where this is a direct thing. It's a tiny, tiny mind, but it is a mind nonetheless. And I thought that was really interesting when I spoke with him about that. But that's what we were focusing on in the discussion that we were having, was the idea of, well, let's pursue this and see what's really going on. So this is the best that we've gotten as far as things like that are concerned, directly to the human consciousness and or consciousness of all living things. Of course, it seems like there's an ongoing theme. You look at almost, there's a myriad of examples that you could take a look at, but you think of how things react on the smallest level we can possibly see. And we see that things react as if they have a motivation of their own. And we go up and up and up to higher and higher units of consciousness, or however we might look at it, and see that these same sort of patterns are following. It's like a fractal pattern. It repeats greater and greater from lesser and lesser. And so I don't think it's really that difficult to see, based on all of the examples that we've discussed here, that it's highly likely that there is a natural order of things that is kind of beyond our realm of perception. Jean Gebser was a philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Ever-Present Origin, in which he discussed the evolution of human consciousness. And within this, he discussed the idea that we used to not be able to see things as well as we see them today. The sky used to not be differentiated from the ground, and now we can differentiate it. And he compares this through literature of the past. And so what we see is the possibility of, or asking ourselves the question, perhaps if we can't see things clearly now, and we haven't seen clearly things in the past, we should remain open to things that seem to be just on the tip of our mind. And I like that idea of pursuing these things further, because I believe that we are on the cusp of something. And I don't mean in kind of like a revelatory epoch. That would be very nice. But I do think that it's something that we can work towards, just like one would improve their character through trials and tribulations. If that makes any sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, again, Rupert was talking about that in the new video with Deepak, and he talks about, morphogenetic fields as, the same kind of invisible field that we see with electromagnetism or gravity. All these field effects are invisible. And, the reason that we, reject notions, or that the cultural dominant paradigm rejects notions of consciousness extending beyond the body, comes from our cultural journey and our cultural biases, not because, fields as a force are impossible. There's all these invisible forces throughout nature that we're, that we observe through their effects on us. And that I think the, transformation of understanding that Gabriel was pointing to, well, obviously has to do with those kind of things, understanding that, yes, these forces are real. The psyche does extend beyond the body, and there's all these ways that the world is much more complicated and mysterious and wonderful than our institutions have led us to believe. Shannon, did that spark anything for you?
Yeah, absolutely, because, science in many ways is reinventing the wheel, as Gary said, and we all know that, ancient traditions and, Aboriginal cultures have known this for millennia, and particularly, in the Western world, we're having to rediscover it, but science is, able to ascertain and measure to a degree that, for instance, the human heart generates an electromagnetic field around it that can be 15 to 25 feet in circumference around us. And, as was mentioned earlier, the emotional tone that is embedded in synchronicity has a big piece to do with that, because the human heart isn't just a pump. It's 80 to 85% neurons. There's a mind in the human heart, and regardless of that, the emotional, emotions really are the warp and weft of the fabric of a bond. And like Sheldrake's work was finding, is that the dog is attuned emotionally through the bond with its human companion, and the same thing with other human beings. And this understanding is imperative at this point, so that we are really living on the planet, in the cosmos, understanding that it's all connected. We're all bonded to all of it, and you can't touch one thing without affecting all the others. But there is a real force. There's a lot more to discover and also rediscover, and that's what I love about this symposium. It's just what I would call edge walkers, people who can handle, being in the tension of not knowing. And in discovery, you can truly only find out new things if you're suspending a foregone conclusion. And so just pioneering through that.
I mean, this is one of the most fantastic, fascinating topics that I could cover, and I just love talking about it. And I certainly love listening to you all discuss your your opinions and descriptions of it. We do have a call, Rascala. He's in Florida, and he has a question. Welcome aboard, Rascala.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
To say it's interesting doesn't even come close, but amazing. It's amazing. You know, somebody said a little while ago something about trees being able to recognize other trees that were not getting nutrition and being able to pass that nutrition on. Is there? I mean, I'm not trying to sound facetious here. Has somebody actually done a test on this? Has somebody actually researched this out?
Yeah, I do know that there's a botanist, and if you'll forgive me, I do not have that name in front of me, but there was a study conducted, and there was what they don't know is exactly how that communication process is going on, but it is through the root system. They've gotten that far.
So what we're learning then is even trees care for one another.
Exactly.
Well, we can also see this evidenced in Paul Stamets's description of mycelial networks of fungus, in which there will be some sort of infection or problem that's going on through a very long, very large mycelial network. And once it's encountered and taken care of in one particular end, and these networks can be miles long. There's one in Oregon that's dozens and dozens of miles long. Once this issue or invading force has been addressed, the rest of the network will be able to deal with it. It's as if the mycelial network acts just like a mind or a system of its own. So, although it's slightly different than that description, I know that Paul Stamets has done work, at least with mycelial networks, in researching that.
I see. Scala, anything else?
Well, yeah, I could go on forever. I got another point that someone said was about the birds flying. You know, I didn't think about the birds flying, but I did think about the fish. How many times have you seen fish flying? Listen to me. Fish swimming in the water in a school, and a predator comes along, and all of those fish know exactly how to move precisionally just to get that thing out of the way, and they all come right back together again. So I know that I agree with everybody that there is indeed a consciousness. I believe at this point it's even been proven by scientists that they have gone beyond the atom and found that beyond the atom there's nothing but consciousness at that point. So I agree with everybody. There's an absolute consciousness that goes on. How much we have access to that, I think, is the variable. Would anybody like to comment? And I'm not trying to be silly. I'm trying to be serious. Would anybody like to comment? Do you think that like ants and insects and things like that, they are unquestionably connected to it? But do you think that they have they know that they're, I can't think of the word. I can't think of the word when you know that you're alive. I can't think of the word right now.
Self-awareness?
Yeah, like self-awareness. Sentient.
Mm-hmm. Anybody want to go on that?
Well, to make it kind of, go ahead.
I think that any child who has had a moment of curiosity would see an ant, struggling to pick something up or things like that, or you chase after it and it will, you chase after a bunch of ants or, behave in a manner that is attacking, they will react to that. And we could say that that is some kind of chemical response, but I think that's an indication of at least a certain level of consciousness and awareness, the need for self-preservation. And it depends, I suppose, on what we would define. Does the need to preserve oneself indicate that we are conscious? I mean, I believe so. There have been assertions by, I forget the name of the board, but there was a Swiss board that talked about plants reacting to being cut down and things like that, and that they declared plants to be living in the same way that animals are living. Yeah,
there's certain plants that will respond to fire.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that we're awfully biased, and this is why this, symposium and the, future, casting off of what happens with this and the exploration is the bias with the human ego and the assumption that that is where consciousness ends. And, if anything, I think we're having to work on tempering that. I know in the work that I do with patients, individually and on group levels, has a lot to do with the tempering of, that particular kind of consciousness, because it's what separates us from the natural world all too often. And when we're able to reconnect with our nature, then we're right back in league with the ants, the trees, the fungi, the murmuration of birds. They don't have the albatross around their neck of the ego to deal with, and so they're just quote unquote dialed in. Their transmission and reception system, no matter how tiny, works just fine.
Okay.
Well, and the healing function in a lot of therapy really is helping people get returned to that natural state, because healing is simply natural.
Right.
Animals do it.
What kind of healing that you're talking about?
Well, ultimately what we would call, psychological healing or emotional healing, but certainly, my area of expertise is, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we're also talking about some neurological healing as well that takes place when people, embark in this kind of work. We do know through neuroplasticity that consciousness itself actually helps regulate and even repair the nervous system and the parts of the brain that have incurred damage due to trauma.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And yeah.
Okay, Risk, anything else, buddy?
If you want to give me the time, I'll keep going.
Well, if you want to hang out, you're welcome to. But I've got some questions too, so that's why I'm asking.
Okay.
You. I don't want to just cut you off.
All right.
Okay. So
okay.
I want to just let the listeners know that one example of what Shannon was talking about the trees communicating with each other, is from work done at the University of British Columbia by a forest ecologist by the name of Simard, Simard, and that's at the University of British Columbia. And the trees were communicating through their the fungal threads in the forest floor. So, anyway, one example.
See, and that's what makes it funny for me. I've been on the air for about 7 years now, and in that time, I've had some who will tell me they're psychic and that they're connecting the angels and all this stuff, and but they'll in the same breath tell me that animals don't have souls or consciousness, and neither do plants. And right there, that tells me you're not connecting to anything, because if you were, you'd know that they do. I believe that plants absolutely have some kind of awareness, because that test you were talking about with the, somebody did a test, I think it was a weed whacker they used, and these plants were very nervous when they heard that thing getting close.
Self-preservation equals consciousness, maybe.
So now, what is your understanding of the unconscious, or what some might call the subconscious?
Mm-hmm. Shannon, you want to start?
Well, I mean, certainly the area that I'm, dipping into and helping others dip into is, the collective. Perhaps, that could be the same thing as the morphic fields, and this is just there's a consciousness. Some people have referred to this as like the Akashic records. Regardless of what you call it, there is a wellspring of wisdom and understanding and knowing that can be tapped into. The Aboriginal peoples of, many cultures certainly understand this. And so, being able to, suspend the I know it all or the reductionist materialistic bias in the mind can help us, dip more deeply into this area where, you know, with a great deal of curiosity, you can actually find answers. I've certainly had doctors send patients to me who had, you know, irreconcilable symptoms from thyroid to, you know, heart issues, and they have tried everything from east to west and everything beyond in between in terms of medicine traditions, but going in and, you know, doing, you know, the more Jungian or tapping into the unconscious, they would end up, you know, discovering something and symptoms abated. Can I explain how that works? No. But I don't need to know how altogether, although I'm curious to know that it does. There's just a wellspring and a ground of all the spiritual traditions and belief systems and cultural practices for millennia that tap into this. And I would say that they, you know, our predecessors certainly had a very tight relationship with the plant world and the animal world, the mineral world as well, and they were consulted as well. And although you can't have a conversation with them via language as we know it, there certainly is communication that happens.
Right.
Yeah, there's three different things that come to mind, Shannon, as I hear what you're saying, and Michael, as I respond to your question. You know, first of all, for me, the basic metaphor is that, you know, I see consciousness and the unconscious as like an iceberg, and our ego and our self-awareness is really the tip, you know, the above the surface awareness, and then things extend down from there into our unconscious, which contains our history, our family experiences, through to the collective experience, through to, you know, my ancestors from 1 million years ago, and, you know, the archetypal level and the collective, you know, experience and unconscious of the whole of humanity at the moment. You know, one of the things that's really interesting in terms of how we're shared and connected through the unconscious is this thing that's been studied, and I think it's Dean Radin at IONS that's been looking at this, is people's awareness of events about 10 minutes before they happen. There seems to be this spike in unconscious awareness just before things come into consciousness. And, you know, a friend of mine had an experience that was quite tragic, where they dreamed of a tragedy that befell people that were close to them several months before it happened. So there's this way that the unconscious does connect us both interpersonally and across through time, both forwards and backwards. And then the two other things I would say is, one, in the dialogue with Rupert and Deepak that's up on Deepak's YouTube channel, they have a really wonderful discussion about this question, what is the unconscious? They go right into that. And you know, you have Deepak bringing his piece from Vedanta and the Eastern approach, and Rupert discussing morphogenetic fields. And really, you know, we don't know in the end what the unconscious is or what these larger fields are, but we know them by their effects. And what my favorite Jungian says on that question, and Yulanov, who's a Christian and a Jungian, and brings a passion to her Jungian work and a deep, you know, thirst for spiritual answers. She says, and she's a very established scholar and looks at all the psychoanalytic and psychological traditions. She says that when you look at all of these psychological traditions, whether it's Bion or Jung or Freud or whoever, in the end, none of them can really explain what does the healing in psychological work. And so the answer for Jungians and the answer for me is that in the end, there's a way that we get connected somehow in a way that we weren't before. We find the center. We make a contact with something inside of us that we needed. And that question and that resolution is ultimately a spiritual event, and ultimately, on some level, to really speak about it with truth is to say that it is somehow spiritual. Now, I don't think you have to define at all what that is, but what doesn't work there is the kind of reductive answers, whether those are Freudian or, socio, biological or, behavioral kind of answers. Those really don't suffice for me. And I think that our time is about the realization of these bigger forces and simply exploring the questions. The shadow or the dominant culture that we're under today really, really loves its oversimplifications and is just so certain that they are absolutely right, and boy, they have all the answers. And the other folks that we're talking about here and that, are at the symposium, for the most part, I really think all of us share an openness to being in the mystery and not having all the answers. And I think that's a place of humility, and I'm very proud to be with that group of people.
I see. Gary?
Yeah?
I'm sorry. Who are we missing?
Gabriel.
I'm here.
There you are. Yeah.
So I'd like to give a complementary perspective. I think that when we're talking about the unconscious, things like that, when we're thinking about our own view of that, there seems to be this ongoing theme. I grew up as an evangelical Christian, and I had a very dogmatic stance about the way things were. And in Sheldrake's book, Science Set Free, he talks about that sort of idea being a holdover in the reductionist scientific community from earlier monotheistic tangents, and that those things are kind of carried on and carried over. But there are things that people have done in the past, and this is kind of one of the roots of shamanism, is people have worked with their own minds and transformed their own minds through interesting and odd activities. And they're really old, and some groups around the world still practice them, but they embody a lot of these Jungian concepts. If you want to be brave, then you convince yourself that you are a bull or a wolf or a lion, and you actually work yourself into a frenzy of sorts in order to do that. And that's a very deep, archaic aspect of the human spirit, but we still tap into that in many different ways. You go to a football game and you see, all the football players like butting heads with each other and like yelling at each other to get themselves riled up. They're putting themselves into ecstatic states. They're tapping into the part of themselves that overrides the nervousness, the fear, the inability to perform, and taps into something more raw and visceral that comes from an archaic and ancient source. So I think in one respect, that is one of the keys to shamanism and even modern magical traditions and things like that. But it all ties in very well with Jungian archetypes and these particular kinds of concepts that our unconscious is a part of us, and it feeds us and it can help us, but it can also hurt us. There's stuff in there that doesn't belong. There's a lot of violence in human history, but there's also a lot of beauty and things like that. So I think that those things come into play, and having a mature recognition of the influence that these things have on us is really key for us to make individual change and growth, and realize that there is that shadow self, so to speak, that we have to be very mindful of, and we have to be active in cleaning up and kind of improving.
Yeah, and having that Shannon and I, the two Jungians on the phone here, Gabriel. And by the way, it's great to be in conversation with you.
Yes, thanks.
I would just want to tease that out a little more and say I think something that certainly comes up for me, and I suspect it did for Shannon too, is that not only can the shadow have those kind of violent aspects, especially today, one of the ways that we miss the shadow that is very much controlling us, or whether it's me personally or people in our society, is that the shadow isn't just these violent aspects that we can put down, but lifelessness and disconnection from vitality and disconnection from the vigorousness one of the things that really characterizes modern society is, we're too in our heads. We're disconnected from the body. We've lost those pieces, and that's a lot of what Shannon's work is about. So, the shadow can be those parts of us, the ways that we're not connected to life.
I see. Very
well,
interesting.
absolutely. I mean, we do know the healing function and like treating, PTSD or trauma, is actually accessing, parts of the brain and the collective that have a more animal nature to it, that they naturally heal. All the cutting edge work that's happened in trauma has literally come from observing animals that are in the wild, and although they face great peril, they also do not develop, neuroses or PTSD or stomach ulcers and whatnot. And so engaging the shadow, although there's material in there that we have to excavate and, transform because it would be dangerous otherwise, there's also this wealth of wisdom and just natural regulation that occurs. Because I do think the living in the head of the Western culture in particular is a dissociated state, right? And we are unconsciously acting out our shadow material. We would do.
Oh, so you there? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, I don't know what happened. Everybody still with us?
I am.
Oh, okay. We have a call. Oh, that's what it is. A call coming in. Are our guests still with us? Oh boy. I don't know what happened. I'm gonna have to let you go for a moment here, James. Something's happening when people call in. I don't know what it is, but it's causing us problems, and that's not good. All right.
Hello.
I think we're back here. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. I'm going to answer calls that are coming in, and I think that somehow our lines are getting messed up here, and it's goofing us up. So I apologize for that.
No worries. I'm here.
All right, great. Shannon, you could pick up. Sorry about that. Is she still with us?
Doesn't sound like she is. Well, you got me and Gabriel.
Okay, great.
We're here.
All right, great. It's showing that she's on there, but there. I think she's might be calling. I don't know. I'm afraid to answer it now.
It's Russian roulette radio style.
Shannon, good. You're back with us.
Hey there.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I'm trying to bring in callers who are calling in with questions, and when I do, for some reason, it's cutting you guys off. So I might refrain from taking calls at the moment because this is really interesting stuff, and I don't want to have phone problems. But you could pick up where you left off. Sorry about that, Shannon.
Just, engaging, the unconscious. There's just such a wealth of information, and, the healing function, although we don't understand the mystery of it, that is working in psychotherapy as I employ it, is just essentially having people, gain entrance back into their body. I do think that that's unfortunately kind of a symptom of not only a materialistic and reductive culture, but also a culture that's tried to disavow or distance or divorce itself from nature. And so you can't really have a body with that being the mandate. And so reconnecting, there's just a natural regulation that happens when one brings their consciousness in that, because I would say definitely in Western culture, the body is in the unconscious for a great deal, including sexuality and just our physical nature. And that's been kind of the shadow side of some of the more, quote unquote, new age movements, is although lovely spiritual transpersonal perspectives, there can be kind of the same mistake that's made in, more, monotheistic or, fundamental type belief systems, because it's throwing the body out in the garbage as if it's like not real. And I'm always saying to people, like, this isn't dress rehearsal. This is a real experience.
See, I always looked at the body as the vehicle. Like, if we want to go somewhere, we get in our car. That's our vehicle. And I think that this body is the vehicle for me. I don't believe I'm the body. Not that I want anything to happen to the body now. I know I want it. So,
right.
Yeah, so I look at the concept when spiritual people will talk about the soul. To me, the soul and the consciousness are about the same thing, at least to me anyways. But I'm not saying I'm right, but that's how I think of it. What do you guys think?
I mean, it's a super big question. I mean, to some degree, you could say consciousness is bringing, marrying the soul back with the body, but there's obviously a consciousness that exists beyond our, physical earth suits. But that's definitely the trail that, this symposium is blazing, which is, how to actually embody the spiritual practices, not just think about them or engage them in this kind of mildly dissociated, realm of ideas. We want to actually, have the rubber meet the road. I believe, as you were saying at the beginning of the radio show, how important it is that, this could change things. This is how we change things. We can't just have spirit. We can't just have, the material world. They have to be reunited, and it's consciousness that helps, bridge those two things through image, through emotion, through creativity.
Yeah. Can I riff on that for a minute?
Oh, please do.
Oh, yeah.
Jump in anytime.
And then I think Gabriel might get probably sparked by this. But, for me, one of the ways that we can understand our time through, more clearly and with more meaning is that we're at the end, for me personally, the metaphor I use is that, and we talked about this last time, Michael, we're at the end of an over-masculine era, an over-rational era, an era that is defined by the deep need to split spirit from matter and make spirit, everything up in heaven, great, and all these earthly things bad. Project the shadow onto matter and the body and women and make, everything up in the sky, that's great. And, so that's how you get a 9/11, and that's how you get all these fundamentalist movements that really are there. It's a split. It's a psychological quality of splitting and division, and it's an unhealthy thing where you've imagined, that one part of reality is where all the goodness is, and another part of reality is where all the badness is, and you're just going to settle into that, and that's going to be your worldview. And it's a worldview that's schizoid. It's broken in half. And I think that what people really crave is the reuniting of those two pieces. So bringing spirit and matter together, bringing consciousness into the body. That's why this event is called Synchronicity, Matter, and Psyche Symposium. It's about the healing of that, the bringing together. And that's, for me, the movement that is alive in a lot of different ways in our culture today. So whether that's the fact that you can go do yoga at the mall, and you couldn't do that 20 years ago, or that we're, 100 other things are going on, that is the movement that is alive today. And that's what I think, that's where the healing is. And that's why an event like this and this discussion we're having right now, we're having it because we're called to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. We have a break coming up in a few minutes, but if I can, I'd like to get your, if you would, educate our listeners on the concept of Carl Jung's description of the collective unconsciousness.
Shannon, you want that one?
Oh, no, you can take that one.
Well, I mean, actually, the collective unconscious was an idea that was around when Jung was a young man. So he didn't invent it, but it was in the fields that he was moving in. That was, in the German philosophy world, that was around at that time. What happened with Jung is that he was in the right man in the right moment, in the right place to figure some things out that we didn't understand in our culture before. And that was this notion of the collective unconscious, that there's archetypes, patterns, ways of understanding and being, and ways, forms that reality plays through that are universal across time, culture, and place. So he would see, for example, a very strange image in a woman's dream or a child's dream. And then he would see that same image in a strange alchemical text, that he was the only one in Switzerland that had a copy of this strange 500 or 1,000-year-old document. And so he would see these things playing out. And this is before TV and the Internet. He can know for a fact that that child or that woman who'd had that dream did not ever in her life see this Chinese alchemical text. So he knows that when he can see these two things together, that these forms play out through the human psyche, across time and space and culture. And I even think that archetype is beyond human. I think it's throughout nature. So for me, the collective unconscious is a lot like morphogenetic resonance. It's a way that we understand a field of habit, of form in which things are likely to play out. So whether it's an archetypal drama like Oedipus or death and rebirth, or a million other things in our experience, there's these patterns that have a problem and a solution, or an evolution built into them, that the collective unconscious is the sort of the encyclopedia of those forms, that we can use them to understand how things are likely to play out, and to understand what we need for our healing and all that sort of stuff.
Okay. Anybody else before we hit the break?
If I could just really quickly touch on, again, with my conversation with Rupert Sheldrake, he cited a recent study, and you'll forgive me, I don't have the reference for it, but a recent study in which laboratory mice were being tested, and they were given, they were exposed to a particular chemical which they were averse to, or actually they had no reason to be averse to. But when it was given to them, they received electric shock. Kind of one of the older, more archaic styles of experimentation. But what would happen is, as soon as the kind of a Pavlovian response of sorts, as soon as the mice would smell the smell, they would associate it with an electrical shock. The interesting part is that the grandchildren, the children and grandchildren of these particular mice, who had never met their parents, would smell this particular same chemical and have an adverse reaction to it for no apparent reason. They didn't have a reason to do it, because in their little tiny lifetime, they were never exposed to this. And so there was some sort of memory that was passed on that this particular thing is something to be avoided because it causes adverse effects. I just thought that was an interesting touch-up to hear this thing.
Well, yeah, that gets into like epigenetics and how science is understanding, like on a more like genetic level, how we are dialed into the collective or morphogenic fields, because we do record our experiences on the protein sheets of genes, and then that does get passed on through the process of methylation to generations. So there is such a thing as quote unquote genetic memory. That's getting into, the physiology of it, right? But it points towards this bigger phenomenon, which is still the mystery and continues to be so.
Fascinating. Okay, hold on with me, everybody. We are going to take a break. I had just the time of the break to run and try to get it taken care of. Which brings me to my next question for you guys, and maybe
Who
you
has
can.
a mop?
Well, it's a rug, so not good. My feet are now sitting on a towel. So, synchronicity. Maybe we speak about that just a little bit. I know Carl Jung, he had a definition for this as well, and I thought maybe that would be a good next question with what's been happening to me today.
Shannon, you want to start, or you want me to start?
You
or
go ahead.
Gabriel, you want to start? Whoever.
Either one of you. It's whoever wants to shoot first. Go ahead.
Well, normally we'd go with one of us two, but Gabriel, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll go from experience here. I did a little experiment with my life in which I thrust myself into a situation where I was not comfortable. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know where I was going. I was looking for work. And I was in a situation where I kind of did the craziest thing I've ever done, and that was trust my gut and trust the universe to bring the right people, the right places, the right occasions to come about. And what I'll say about that is that it was a lot harder at first than I thought it would be, and then it was a lot more amazing than I ever could have imagined. I met people who, through the course of that, have come to be good friends of mine. And I've learned some lessons that have allowed me to trust a little bit more in however you want to frame it, a big plan or kind of a roadmap of sorts. And I've learned how to navigate my own personal space by keeping my eye on things like synchronicities, like people bumping into me and saying the exact phrase that I just said in my own head, or singing a song that I just had in my head, or saying, oh, I was talking to so-and-so about such and such, and have it be the exact same thing that's going on. And it seems that the more I've tuned into things like that in my own personal life, the more I've found it happens every day. And not only every day, it happens all day. And then you bump into people. I think several times, even today, in conversations with people texting or on Facebook or on the phone and things like that, they'll be like, I'm making rainbow carrot salad. And I would say, oh my goodness, I'm making rainbow carrot salad too. That's morphic resonance. Because there's this kind of connection that we're all having, right? We're all having this connection. And the more we tune into it, the more it becomes just a laughable thing. You laugh so much because you're like, this is ridiculous. But the one thing that it does, I'm talking about the practical application, I suppose, is it allows you, whether you're having a good day or a bad day, to see that you're still on the good path. Because bad things do happen. People die, people get sick, we suffer, we have heartache, all kinds of terrible things happen. It's part of the human experience. But if we can see synchronicities in this way as a sort of series of road signs, we know that we can keep going. A road sign is a great example because when you go down the highway and you're traveling, you see a sign that says Tupelo, 150 miles. You don't have to go to Tupelo, but you do know, okay, I know I'm on the right road to Tupelo. So if Tupelo is where you're trying to go, you can get there. And you'll see other road signs as you go along the way, little markers that show you along the path, whether or not you're actually still on the right path. And so I like to see these little things that occur in our life, these little interactions, these little coincidences, as other people might say, as little markers along the way. And in that, it has helped me to have courage when I was afraid, and to take heart when I was heartbroken, And this is a very practical thing because we live in a world where the predominating mindset is that we live in a hopeless place, that we live in a cold vacuum, that our lives mean nothing, and that whatever meaning we ascribe comes from whatever we decide to make. And in some ways that's good, but it is also true that these kinds of little confirmations all the time lend to the idea that there is a bigger plan, that there is an interconnectedness that we have. And these synchronicities, to me, are very important because of that. That's what I'll say about the matter.
Yeah, and thank you. And that's such a great answer, and it really sparked me because, doesn't that just remind you and illustrate and show you that it takes you into a whole different view of the world and your place in it, and that we live in this world, Michael, that wants to make all of us only valuable for utilitarian reasons, for economic reasons, for materialist reasons. That each of us is only measured on how much we have or how much we make or whatever, or our power or whatever. And all that, that is the dominant culture's value system. And that's what we're taught to think is valuable, is money and our own monetary worth. And then here's this larger force that, no matter if we're having the worst day or the greatest day, is a wink that says there's something bigger going on. And very often, it's about both, we're finding the center again, we're finding the road sign, as Gabriel was talking, but also it can be about taking our own suffering or dilemmas a little less seriously and seeing our place in the larger flow and the larger picture. Shannon, do you want to riff from there?
Yeah, I'm going to do a little science geek out, but it makes me think of like holographic field theory, where the best metaphor that they use to describe that theory is, in a way, the way we participate in everyday life with just our, senses as they've been defined, the five senses. It's like we're in a movie theater and there's two screens in front of us, and one screen has a side view of a particular kind of fish, and the other screen has a front view of a fish. And as the film is playing, you're noticing that whenever the one on the right moves, the one on the left is moving, and vice versa. And you might extrapolate that, well, there's some sort of cause and effect dynamic going on here, but what's actually the reality is that it's two cameras at different angles on the same fish. So it's a lot like that. The phenomenon of synchronicity or these meaningful coincidences is like a wink from the universe, letting us know that there is this grand design going on and that there is this interconnectedness. We do know for sure that, work that's been done by like Stephen Porges, who's a neurologist, he asserted the polyvagal theory, that it actually became an established fact that the polyvagal nervous system that exists in human beings, is basically just a highly regulated, attuned state where we're dialed in enough to notice, right, the design. And that's, one way you could describe what synchronicity is, this meaningful, so-called coincidence. When people travel, people often report, a high increase in synchronicities. And that's probably because, at least physiologically, it's not the cause of the synchronicity, but the state that people get in when they travel is they're entering into their polyvagal nervous system, which is all of their brain and physiology because you're all at once kind of relaxed, calm because you're on vacation, and yet you're also in an unknown situation, so you have to be alert, and that calm, alert state is a form of consciousness that, delivers us to the ability to notice the connections, because you'll meet the right people and run into the right stuff, and like Gabriel was sharing earlier, even in times of great difficulty, synchronistic events can really be like life-saving, in that you're being reminded that there's something bigger in the design of things that connects all of it. It's such a wonderful perspective.
It is.
Yeah, and let me give you an example of that, and that I hope it's okay to share, and I won't. This is a real example from someone's life that literally, you used the word life-saving there, and that's what made me think of it. And so I won't give out any identifying information in this example, but someone I know who's very open to, they're very grounded, but they're also very open to listening to their inner voice. Was unable to sleep one night and tried watching a movie, and that didn't work, and felt called to go for a walk, and on this walk ended up discovering a young man who'd been in an accident and was unattended and unnoticed and bleeding quite severely, and certainly would have passed away if they had not been found. And she was able to call for medical attention and save this young man's life. And there's a lot to this story, and it's a very personal one and very meaningful for all involved. But the synchronistic aspect that made itself clear, other than the being called to walk, which essentially would be a subjective story, was that several weeks before this, she had at random gone into an art studio and picked a name out of a hat, literally, and chosen a partner to work together on an art project who she never met, and she finished the second half of someone else's work. And weeks later went on, and she found out that man whose name she had drawn from the hat weeks before was actually the father of that young man. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of world we live in. And you cannot blow off that example as observer bias or some other fundamentalist skeptical nonsense. You cannot blow off that example or all these other examples, but this involves multiple other points of objective reference: hospitals, ambulances, art studios, other people. Mm-hmm. So the whole worldview of this random, meaningless world is a sick disease that our culture has developed, that we're trying to cure it from. And when things like that happen, to honor them and hold them in our hearts and in our consciousness really does, to do justice to that story and to hold it properly means to open yourself to a much richer, deeper view of the world that is intimately connected to us and in our hearts. And you really do get to a view that is very close to like a god or a goddess view, that there is this force that is really caring for us in a very deep and complicated and mysterious way. And I don't think we have to put any definition on it, but to honor it and hold that experience means to see a world that is the opposite of meaningless, the opposite of dead, the opposite of random, and I think mm-hmm. that's really what synchronicity is trying to tell us. And I could talk more about synchronicity too if you want me to, Michael.
Sure. I mean, I'm fascinated with all this stuff. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about this, and so please go ahead.
Well, the classic. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Well, I was going to say, there's this funny experiment that I did when I decided to pick up tarot, and I'll just make it quick. I decided that every person that I would do a tarot reading for, I assumed that it would be synchronistic. And so I just allowed myself to have this sort of fanciful view, and I found that before I made that assumption, and I tried to do readings for people just, for giggles and things like that, they weren't nearly as accurate as when I assumed, well, you're sitting here with me, so the universe obviously has you and I connected at this moment. So once I made that assumption, it kind of made everything dead on. And I know that divinatory system may not be something that everybody believes in or thinks is interesting, but at least in my experience, it is shown over and over again that when I operate on the assumption that I'm supposed to be sitting in front of the person that I'm talking to, it seems to have a very strong effect on the reading and things like that, for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So some sort of connection there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You assume that you're with each other for a reason. You assume that you're in the presence of someone else for an express purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
And can you talk about how there would be meaning in that, Gabriel?
Well, I think the meaning of that would be then you kind of can, you can experience the universe's wink, so to speak, because you understand. You're like, oh, again, it comes back to that thing I was talking about, sort of chuckling to yourself. You don't. After a while, you don't even worry about. I mean, you worry about things, but you don't see things the same as when you kind of have that hopeless perspective from before. And then there's also this thing that happens when you have a connection with someone like that, who is a complete stranger, man or woman, it doesn't matter, where your compassion glows and builds and grows, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. You must really, whatever's going on here is something that needed to happen. And so the meaning in that is, I think, one of the many ways in which the universe kind of forces us, when we're not wanting to be social or things like that, kind of forces us to connect with people, because it seems like there's a very strong pull by the universe for us to come together and have a stronger sense of love, of brotherly love, sisterly love, familial love, in all of its forms. So I think that would be the meaning that you would find in it, that there is a force that wants us to join and not separate.
Okay. Now,
yeah, and you can see in that a different message again from the message that our dominant culture teaches us. And I think the dominant culture is teaching us to be afraid of attributing meaning and to never see anything as having meaning. And, the view that we're talking about is essentially letting go of being afraid of the world.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and Gary, you had described, our culture's viewpoint being like a disease, and I know working specifically as a clinician with, trauma, talk about, people experiencing in a very microcosmic, personal way what it's like to have psyche split off from matter. There's a phenomenon associated with trauma called dissociation, and that can occur on any part of the spectrum of trauma, but that disconnection or diabolic action, the etymology of the word diabolic is diabolos, it means to tear it apart. The bringing conscious awareness, right, to, all of your being really does begin to shift that and reunites, the psyche with the matter of your body in a way that you're able to dial back into the meaning, because I really do believe that we're made Everything in the universe, including ourselves, is made of, this material. We are made of star stuff, as Carl Sagan would say, and it's designed to be able to bond and care and attach to each other. I'm not talking about attachment in a Buddhist sense. I'm talking about just in the way that we're wired to do this. So Gabriel's, attitude in his engaging of the people he was doing readings for, really did lend itself to dialing in to the, inherent connection of all things, and powerful things happen when you have that attitude. And it's a practice. One has to practice going into that state, because it can be scary. You're having to suspend, foregone conclusions, and it's the unknown. It's certainly not an egoic state to enter into, and yet so much happens when we're in that state.
Yeah, and what occurred to me, Shannon, when you brought up the word diabolical and diabolus,
yeah.
Is we've seen in the last 2 weeks such a rash of these horrible shootings, and for me, when that's what sparked when you said that, and those poor folks that are acting out in that way are a product of a culture that tells them that they are individually meaningless, that they have no meaning, and that they're only valuable for their power, and the only kind of power that they can find is through a gun and through hurting other people. And that comes from a culture, and our culture is what is making the weakest and the worst in us act out that way. And to come back to my masculine feminine metaphor, there is often a kind of masculine acting out here against the feminine, and our culture still is, although it's getting better at honoring the feminine parts of reality, it still is rejecting, feeling and vulnerability and the heart space, and all those qualities from a Jungian point of view that we associate with the feminine, which are present in men and women. And you really can see that kind of acting out from a place of, disconnection. Those are folks that don't have the center, that don't feel the worth of their own life. And that could be a struggle that all of us go through, even those of us that are doing this work a lot. And I would say that that's part of what we're trying to do here as well.
Well, absolutely, to do the healing of the syzygy, right, of, matter from soul, the body from soul, on an individual, level, certainly lends itself, to a greater good, because if one, finds they're dialed in, they find the meaning, they feel the connection and their inherent worth, they're certainly not going to view others as expendable. And these are literally symptoms of a psychological, malady. There's been, a pathological, psychological, dynamic going on in our culture, and splitting things off like, this realm is good and this realm is bad. It literally mimics, the psyche of a narcissist who lacks empathy. That's the defining characteristic, and we are definitely participating in a culture that encourages narcissism, and it's pretty easy to create.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's such a pertinent definition there, Shannon. The psychopath, the definition of a psychopath is lack of empathy. Well, the empathy is exactly what we're talking about when I say the archetypal feminine.
Exactly.
So.
Incredible. And, we have been, humanity, that is, has been conditioned with this, the good people get this and the bad people get that. And, and really, somebody was on the show the other night and said it's your perception of, what's good and what's bad. And that's true to a sense, I guess. But, I mean, we all can agree that hurting a child's bad. And I think even the people that do it got to know that what they're doing is wrong, or they wouldn't hide it, right? So now in relation, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Well, I was just going to say the subtle reductionism that can happen, right, even in, certain movements of, consciousness or the New Age movement. I'm not trying to diss the whole thing, but just this whole kind of cause and effect belief that, either, right, bad things happen because you had a negative vibe or mind frame, right, which is absurd. Not to say that our mind frame, our frame of mind doesn't have an influence on stuff, but even more narcissistic is that idea of perception, that, things are only good and bad based on your perception. And like you said very clearly, Michael, that, there's just some things that you got to call. It's not about perception. There's no way to look at that. It's only good.
Right.
Exactly. Now, in relationship to your understanding of human consciousness, how would you describe what healthcare professionals might call mental illness? Or, what would your perception be of that?
Well, I think, unfortunately for, over a century since the dawn of, psychology, it's mostly been a reductionist study of the mind. I know psychotherapy literally means the tending of the soul, so there's been a shift in trying to engage the whole person, but mental illness, as it's called, is ultimately, related to, and we know this for a fact, the, early emotional environment of the child and not being empathically attuned to by caregivers when we are little and still literally developing our brains and our nervous systems, including the reception sites for, benzodiazepine reduction, production, things that help us feel calm and help us feel regulated. If you're not being empathically attuned to, literally loved, in a real grounded way, what happens is there is a dysregulation in the nervous system and the brain, and neurotransmitter production and reception goes off forward, and everything from depression to, addiction, can be traced back to the early emotional environment. I know that there's more complex factors involved, in all of those things to some degree, but we can't underestimate that this so-called, feminine empathic attunement is really truly the most powerful preventive medicine that we could be doing for the world. Dr. Spock, issued his book, at a time and encouraged parents, to leave their children in the crib and let them cry it out. And what we know for a fact is that affects their brain development and nervous system in a way that actually does lead to, quote unquote, mental illness. I mean, mental illness is essentially, just a symptom, right, of being in the field with people who are not conscious, who are not dialed in. And not to just lay blame, there's reasons why, certain parents are not equipped and don't know how to be present or be in their heart or be empathic. But all that being said, it's just basically, feeling a disconnect. Mental illness is all, disconnect. There are concrete neurological things going on there, and yet we do know that a lot of that can be repaired because of neuroplasticity with empathic attunement. 99% of what I'm doing as a clinician is reparenting people, just being emotionally attuned and fully present. It makes a huge difference. I'm not claiming that the healing function can be just reduced to that, but it's hugely reparative, and it literally can regulate people's brains in a way that's phenomenal. You'll see the abatement of the depression or the anxiety. So we need to have a different idea, because too much of the way we diagnose people is getting into just the symptomology. We just have diagnostic criteria, and we're not acknowledging the etiology and what causes it. There's a tendency to reduce it to genetics, but even if you have a quote unquote a genetic predisposition for any ailment, from cancer to alcoholism to depression, what we know for a fact is it is the emotional environment and the early bonding experience that turns.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we might have.
Hello?
Yeah, we're here. I think we lost her. Okay.
Gabriel, do you want to take on from there, or I can go on?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on the matter. It sounds like the way that things are being described is, in essence, sort of when, going back to the Sheldrake concept of a receiver, you think about a television and how you can change channels on a television, and the channels can be very, very different. If you drop the television on your way home, you may damage the television permanently. It can be repaired if you know what to diagnose. It doesn't mean that the transmissions coming from all the different stations are not still transmitting. It's not like, oh, my television is broken, I guess there's nobody transmitting the football game any longer. Mm-hmm. That's still going on, but something is being lost in the connection. Now imagine someone having several channels playing at the same time, and then you have this jumble of information, too much information all at the same time. And imagine if you have the Discovery Channel and the football channel and a children's channel all at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. And when that's the only thing that's coming through, I'm using this as a giant metaphor, if you guys don't know. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to mental illness, it seems that this might be an okay metaphor just to describe that, people do have their wiring, they do have their neurological pathways. And I was actually at a meeting a couple of weeks ago in which this doctor who's a neuroscientist was talking about depression and anxiety, and he's like, it's really simple, guys. There's these receptors, and when one fires to the other, it doesn't make the leap. So we throw some Zoloft in there, and it kind of smooths everything over so that you'll be able to use that pathway again, and then you'll feel better. And so that is an issue of your simple wiring. And some might argue, and in fact, some people in my book, I allow for divergent opinions on the matter. Some have argued that the fact that when our brain stops operating properly, that is evidence that we don't have a soul or a mind or consciousness or things like that. So it seems to be to me, though, that we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about the television set, and then we're talking about the signal that's coming in and what's operating through that. So when it comes to mental illness, I've seen people who are in they're obviously not themselves. They're one particular way normally, and then all of a sudden something changes, and you don't know the person at all. And it seems like the channel changed. So I'll leave it at that as far as I'm concerned, but it seems to be a decent metaphor, especially in reference to when we're talking about consciousness and the mind itself and the mechanics of it versus something greater outside of it.
Yeah, and in relation, if I can, based on your metaphor there with the TV, for those who say, well, when the body dies, that's it, or the brain dies, that's it. But at the same time, you get that TV, and when it's working fine, you plug it in, that energy's there. The energy's going through it. And when something goes wrong, that energy can no longer go through it because it's broken. So I think that's the same way. I think that's the same way the body works. It's once it's broke, well, we can't use it no more, so we move on.
Recycle.
Yeah. Okay.
I think a bunch of folks at home cringed when you talked about all the folks that have dropped their television sets on their heads at home may have cringed a little bit at the start of that.
All right. And how would you describe what forensic and criminal psychologists call psychopathy or anyways.
Sociopathy.
Thank you. And that was a question that came from my good friend Dr. Nooch, and he says like sociopaths like Adolf Hitler, Jim Jones, serial killers, people like that.
Well, I think Shannon really hit the nail on the head with the definition of being the lack of empathy. And for me, I just want to get one thing in there. When Shannon and Gabriel were talking about kids, it reminded me something that I think is an important piece of what we're doing at the symposium that folks are going to want to know about, which is, in addition to having Rupert Sheldrake and Graham Hancock there, and they're both going to be doing their own presentations, and that's great. And Jill Peirce is there, Rupert's wife, talking about the healing voice. There's another crew of folks that are doing really fascinating work, including on reincarnation and children's stories of reincarnation. And for 30 years at the University of Virginia, there's been a project where folks have been recording kids' stories of reincarnation, young kids, talking about the fighter plane that they flew in World War II and the name of their co-pilot and this, that, and the other stuff that even their parents didn't know. And stories like that have been coming up, and there was a professor there before Dr. Jim B. Tucker, who's going to be at the symposium, and he and now Dr. Tucker have been recording those stories and putting them out in books. And again, it brings us back to the question of what's the unconscious and what's going on out there. And the answer is a lot more than we suspect and know. And so, we have Dr. Tucker there, and we have Marilyn Schlitz, who's a past president of Institute of Noetic Sciences, and she has a film that she's going to show at the symposium called Death Makes Life Possible that features Rupert and features Dr. Tucker. And so these issues and questions around reincarnation and, are again a part of what we're talking about here. And for me, again, they take us back into mystery. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we so need, because our culture is one that, demands that everyone have all the answers all the time, and that we all live in these oversimplified certitudes that are wrong and very often meaningless and unsatisfying and life-denying. And so, those folks and, issues around reincarnation and stuff that they're hearing through kids is a part of what is there. And I just think, when you take all that together, I feel like, all of us are going to feel a lot smarter and a lot more centered after that weekend. So.
Yeah, and it bothers me when people tell me, they do act like they have all the answers, or they'll say, go to the scriptures, everything you need is there, or go to, read this or watch that, or, it's like, it's not that easy. And for somebody to try to simplify it like that, I guess I can understand why they do it in some cases, but I don't know if we're supposed to understand it all, because it's so fascinating. And I always say, if we could figure out exactly what and where consciousness comes from and all, we'd be able to explain everything, maybe.
Well, yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of Joe Campbell kind of describing whether it's, religious fundamentalism or, scientific fundamentalism, that, so often we'll go to the restaurant, and eat the menu instead of the meal. We'll get really caught up, in
that's more progressive.
Yes.
But I've been saying it's not the menu, the menu is not the meal. See, that's what I mean. That's a synchronicity. I've been talking about that all week. So, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, that's exciting, though.
Go ahead.
Well, it's tempting. And that I do think, has a lot to do, my perception and my, way of looking at things. And it's just a way, it's an angle. It's certainly not the whole story. It's just the human ego's, propensity towards being right, avoiding pain. And, truth be told that, hanging out in mystery is certainly not for the faint of heart. I mean, you have to tolerate the tension of not knowing. And, the ego likes to know things. And so we do often, are tempted, all of us are to some degree, to eat the menu instead of the meal, but, I think it's fine to talk about the menu as long as we're recognizing that it's just pointing towards something, that's actually got substance to it.
Right. And there's obviously some kind of intelligent design here. I mean, I just can't believe that we, just formed out of the soil or something.
I really agree with you, Michael. And it's funny because, intelligent design becomes such a negative word because folks are dealing with, Christian fundamentalists using that to defend, literal interpretations of the Bible, which are obviously false. But I'll tell you, for me, and Deepak and Rupert talked they mentioned a brief comment about this, and I had my own experience. Last Friday, I was at the taping of the Real Time with Bill Maher show in L.A., and Bill Maher had Ralph Reed from the Christian Coalition as his guest. And, of course, I'm a Bill Maher fan, and I relate more to his point of view. But I found myself, almost leaning towards Ralph at certain points because, Maher's coming at it from this really, fervent atheist position that just denies the possibility of any kind of afterlife or anything going on. And, I think for a lot of us, the fact that we live in a world that's designed to support life is pretty significant. That so many people do believe that there's intelligent design and that there's an afterlife and all these things. I think the difference between, the problem comes if folks want to make it literal and make it, their version is the only right version. But I certainly don't see any problem with believing in the idea that it's miraculous that this world is fine-tuned the way it is and that it produces life and complexity the way it does. And I'm not ashamed to say that one bit. I think it's the same thing as you're saying, if we could understand consciousness, we'd have it all figured out. Well, if we could understand, these are the same questions, and the answer is some kind of spiritual reality.
Right.
Some kind of God. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, for me, God would be, if somebody asked me to describe what or who God is, I would say it's the universe because it's always creating and destroying, right? So I kind of, maybe I'm simplifying it, but it just makes sense to me that it would be so big that we just couldn't understand it completely. So,
well, yeah, and being able to hang out with the mystery on one hand, and then also enjoying some of the fun that we get to have in reaching new frontiers of science. I was a steering committee for Institute of Noetic Sciences back in the Bay Area years ago, and that whole Marilyn Schlitz was involved, right? Really important figure in that, but so much of that, Institute is about the reunion of science and spirituality. They do not have to be mutually exclusive. They can work together. I mean, even something, like evolution, there's certainly something phenomenal going on. I think it's a lot more complex than that, but it doesn't have to disqualify that there's something clearly larger, bigger, beyond our comprehension that is going on there.
Yeah, I always think of that, Shannon, I always think of that as, evolution is the push, but there's some kind of spiritual pull drawing us into more complicated and creative and wonderful forms, like moths to a flame. There's a push-pull. It's not that evolution doesn't happen. It's just that it's not enough. It doesn't even make sense mathematically. It doesn't even work. Right. The math doesn't work. But, for me, the push-pull of that there's some spiritual, light to which we're drawn into greater forms, that feels better to me.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the one of the oldest adages in mystic history is as above, so below. And we see that there are many parallels between the natural world, the way that the natural world works, and the way that the spiritual world seems to work as well. They seem to work in a complementary fashion. And to me, that's one of the biggest proof texts. I think that, hopefully not too far off in the future, we'll come to a time in which the things that we presently call spirituality will be understood better as just something that we hadn't fully understood yet. And perhaps it will require some sort of massive change in the way that we perceive the world. Hopefully that happens, but it does seem like that is what happens, is the natural world and the spiritual world do work in a complementary fashion. And, we've made mention of all of these archaic societies and indigenous peoples who are still practicing so many things that seem to be more grounded in a naturalistic view, and you find harmony. And I think that is integral to understand that there is a harmonious way of viewing things that we haven't quite figured out. We're like teenagers. We don't quite understand ourselves. We don't quite know ourselves. We don't know what our purpose is, but we're an entire race of people, and we're left in this house called the Earth by ourselves, or, months on end without the parents. Creation alone. Creation alone. So that seems to be the case.
All right. And,
we are in this adolescent phase, obviously.
Oh, we are. We absolutely are. Now, I've got another question here from you, from the good doctor. He says, if you subscribe to Jung's concept of archetypes, how would you define his archetype of the shadow in relationship to the criminal and deviant mind?
Could I hit that? I think about the way that the universe works and the way that all of these archaic forces work. We talked about a hurricane coming and destroying a beachfront community, or even worse, taking over an island, or a tsunami causing a flood. We see these forces of nature that occur, and no one ever says that tsunami was evil. And yet, when we see archaic forces at work in a person who seems to be disembodied, they seem to not have the same empathy. We're talking about the masculine feminine. They seem to not have that. We sometimes fail to recognize the shadow self at work. Somehow, in their wiring, that part of them is just the destructive path. And it's not good, it's not pleasant. It's not moral, but yet we don't view it the same way we would view an earthquake or a hurricane or anything like that, and yet it is very much an embedded part of our archaic nature, that the violence, the lack of empathy. There was a time and a place where all you could do was survive, and in that time and place, behavior was different than it is in a present civilized society, so to speak. And that's not to justify any of those behaviors, but I think that draws the shadow self somehow is dominating that particular person or that character. And it is like, at least in my mind, like the force of a hurricane or of some other destructive force. It's just kind of unruly and runs its course, and it's awful, but it's kind of part of the human experience, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, and I would go on to add that, the role or the relationship between, psychopathology and shadow is, I've, worked a lot with alternative sentencing, and, earlier on in my career. And definitely what I ran into is, kind of getting into the scapegoat archetype, but, definitely because of, the earlier environment of these people. Now, not everyone who has a difficult early environment goes on this path, but there is literally, damage to parts of the brain that are related to the regulation of anxiety. We do know that sociopaths have a shrunken amygdala and do not feel anxiety, but there's damage to the mesolimbic dopamine channel, which is basically the old mammalian brain, where bonding and emotional resonance, as we understand it, is kind of like the feature. This kind of evolutionarily came along when mammals hit the scene, and that damage to that part, makes them incapable of, enacting empathic attunement. A sociopath doesn't view another human being as a human being, and a narcissist, which is kind of on its path right along the spectrum, is just lacking, empathy. So, that we do know that there's like brain damage that you can actually account for, but they're not born with it. Generally speaking, we're talking about the phenomenon of what happens when, when parents or caregivers are not embodied, because the body, right, and these more feminine, vulnerable type, behaviors, such as bonding and vulnerability and connecting and listening to your instinct that tells you pick up that baby, there's damage, and then they go on to kind of basically carry the shadow for the culture. So we're all responsible. I'm certainly not assuaging a sociopath or a narcissist of their, culpability in their behaviors or damages, but they're carrying the shadow for us because we've relegated the body to, the nether regions. We're acting like we don't have to do what every other mammal on the planet has to do, which we have to attach and bond and, do a lot of grooming and, connection type behaviors in order for that, that person to embody their soul. And they can't do that if the physical vehicle, right, is damaged in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the brain and concept we call the mind is the same, different, or somewhere in between, or what do you think about that?
No, I mean, I think they're different. I mean, I think the mind exists, beyond the brain. I just think that the brain is, an extra collection, particularly the neocortex of, neurons that makes us, I guess kind of more fancily neurotic. but the mind certainly is something beyond the brain, but the brain would be more of kind of like nature's incredible design for us to be tapped in, right, to everything. And we appear to be the only species that, might not attach securely to its offspring, basically because we can be conditioned to not do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, conditioned not to attach, and then that is literally the vehicle towards which at least the biology that helps transmit and receive, the consciousness of all in a way that you're tapped in. And a sociopath has absolutely no connection to others, doesn't feel that in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, and where would you say, or any of you, where would you say the human consciousness is located? And obviously, I don't think we know, but if you had to pick a place, where would you put it?
I would say the heart.
And I would agree with you there. I'm
biased in that direction.
Okay. Right. Anybody else?
I think that's that's obviously it's primarily just opinion, but it does seem like with Dr. Rick Strassman's work in his book DMT, The Spirit Molecule, he described about how the pineal gland inside the center of your brain operates 6 to 8 hours after the rest of your body is dead. It's still running, and there's no explanation why. But this does possibly explain why near-death experiences occur when the heart stops, the brain stops, and yet people report very lucid, very clear experiences that are going on, sometimes even describing things that are going on in real life and real space, and they come back and report to it, and they're like, but you were dead, you couldn't have described this. So that's a possibility, but we're talking about the blending of the physical and the non-physical, and it's very difficult because, at some point we don't know how small these connections are, how many receptors it requires to have this connection between the mind and the body, that sort of thing. There was a discussion about microtubules, these tiny, tiny little things inside of our brain that seem to be the source at which things are connecting to nothing and then turning into something. And really, again, it's just sort of that all we can really do presently is guess. But we are getting better and better at understanding kind of the difference between things that are chemical reactions, but also understanding that it's like the television that's working or the television that's been dropped. So it's what part of the television is the part that makes the TV make the picture? Well, the whole TV makes the picture. So I suppose the easiest or broadest answer would be to say, yeah, the whole body is the capsule in which the soul or spirit that we might have would be resting upon. The whole thing.
Yeah, well, they actually know that the stomach is involved in consciousness and other parts. I mean, it's not just the brain. But I think again, I would recommend your listeners check out Rupert and Deepak's latest video, and they have a fantastic discussion about that question. And I think Rupert's answer really is that we live in a field of consciousness, and that our biological selves are a receiver of that, and there's no one right metaphor, but what I was talking about with the iceberg, that the part of the iceberg that we see is our conscious self, and that extends downward. And I probably like even better the idea of the rhizome, like a grass, where it's like a plant that's got the shoot above ground and then is connected to all the other shoots underneath the ground. And consciousness is the field. I mean, the point of the Synchronicity, Matter, and Psyche Symposium is to explore the unity of matter and psyche, that there is no such thing, in my view and in the view of a lot of ancient traditions and in the objective research we're exploring, that matter and psyche are of one fabric, that we live in a world that's invested with both, and that, that's where I would say it is. It's everywhere. It is reality, is consciousness.
Now, given
Absolutely.
I think I just took the blue pill, or is that what happened?
I think so. Well, again, whether it's the pineal gland, right, which we know now if you autopsy it, you can actually see that there's like a cornea and retina. There's like literally the third eye. That is a way to access, it appears, right, the big stuff. And then there's also, but these are just concentrations of, organs like the heart and then the gut that seem to have like maybe bundles of transmission, reception, type connections that help us. But obviously the body really is the ability. I mean, it's giving us the ability to actually experience consciousness in a way that's, utterly unique. So it's not dress rehearsal. This it's an opportunity. And, many people would say that, a body really is kind of, the way God gets to know himself, herself, themselves, itself. It's just informing.
Okay, and I'll tell you, this is so interesting that I'm actually skipping my last break because I want to try to get a few more questions in here before we're done tonight. And I will attempt to take another phone call if anybody wants. We had some calls coming in, but I was afraid that it would cut you guys off. I'm willing to give it a shot here, so we could try it. I've had about an hour where nothing wrong has happened, so I'm regenerated. But given we now live in the information age, how would you define cyberspace and our ever-growing dependency upon information technology? What do you
Gabriel?
This is great. There's we have this connection, this thing that's happening where we're sitting on computers and we're looking at something, and we talk to people that we've never met physically before, and we have a connection to them because we've talked with them, we interact with them, things that they say resonate with us. There's impulses that are going on. We're getting bursts of dopamine, every time we get a like or something changes in oh, I've got an email. Oh, I wonder who it is. It can affect the way that we feel and all of these things. But just like I was saying earlier about as above, so below, we see in the what we would call the spiritual realm, we're mimicking something that's happening in the spiritual realm, in the physical realm. We're already all connected to an internet of sorts. We can see this in nature, but we're mimicking it because in some ways, I think collectively we want to be connected. We want to find a way to be connected. We don't want to be alone. We don't want to be misunderstood. We want to be known and loved. And if we're not finding it through the means by which ancient cultures were doing it, we have to find another way to do it. And so I think that the internet is a natural answer. It is a physical answer in the kind of world we live in to what is already happening, has always been with us. This is, in its own way, a proof of something that has long existed. Alan Moore, the graphic novelist and the guy who wrote what ended up being Watchmen and V for Vendetta, talked about how if we didn't have any chairs in the world, but we all knew about chairs, it would only take a couple of days.
Okay, did it, I think, I don't know. I don't know if it worked or not. Who do we got? 978 area code.
It's me, James.
Hey, James. Now, can my guest hear me? I don't think they can. I think they just got muted. I don't know what's going on. Well, what's your question, quick, James, and then I'll bring them back on.
Well, I just wanted to point out that I had heard that. You hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, about their universal consciousness, the fact that I had heard the challenger, the commander, when he desperately said, "Oh, SH, and I heard him in my mind, and I looked up, and as I looked up, I didn't have to turn my head either way. I saw the challenger blow up, and I actually, saw in Time magazine about a week or two later that that's what the shuttle commander said. So I heard him in my mind from 60 miles away. I was in Orlando, and of course it blew up in Cocoa. So I heard what he said. His last gasp in life was OSH, IT, but and verified by Time magazine a week or two later, on the cover, that I actually heard him in my mind. That's just what I wanted to tell him. And the synchronicity when I reached for the phone. My ex-wife called me. So, but all right, see if we can get it back, Michael.
All right, thanks, James. Sorry about that. And are all our guests with us? I know you're here.
I'm here.
Okay, for some reason, I'm not hearing the other gentleman. Let's see. Okay, I think they're going to call back in. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're gonna try to bring them back in here and see if we can get this fixed. I was afraid that would happen, and that's why I was hesitant to take the call. But okay, we've got one back. Oh, and now he dropped again. Oh, let's see. That, and we'll do that. Maybe that'll fix it. It's been one.
Hello?
Hello. We've got you back. Sorry about that. And we're just working on one more here. Yeah, so I'm not going to take no more calls because I don't know what's happening, but I was afraid of that. Take the call and bam. Okay. All right. Well, let's carry on, and hopefully we get a call back from. Okay, who do we have, by the way? Here we've got
Gary.
Gary's with us. Okay, Shannon's okay. So we're waiting for
Gabriel.
Okay. All right. So let's move on here because I don't want to hold you all up too much longer. And I think he's getting back in now, I believe. All right, you back with us?
I am back.
Sorry about that. I won't take no more calls. I thought I'd give it a try because people have been pounding the lines trying to get in tonight, and unfortunately, it's not cooperating. But you got cut off. If you want to pick up.
You were at the chair, is the last thing I heard.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So the concept of the chair, if all of the chairs disappeared from the earth, there was a chair rapture. It would only take a day before we started building new chairs because the idea of the chair was already there. And so for us, in our own way, as a species, we've had a sense that there has been an internet of sorts. And so we've built one now that we've had the wherewithal to do so. And I think this is a great example of, the ancient Hermetic adage, as above, so below, still working out so nicely, as in heaven, as in earth. That same sort of concept is happening. So, yeah, that's what I think happens. That's why we have the internet, because it's a natural progression, a mimicking of something that's already been happening with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, with the mimesis, I think that on one hand, it certainly is like just concretizing what already exists, but then on the other, it can still be like the phenomenon of going to the restaurant and eating the menu, because there are people, certainly who I've treated, who are loved ones of people who need treatment because they're attached to the internet. And I'm not trying to demonize it, but I'm just saying that, like Gabriel was saying, we do have some pretty strong, physiological responses, including, neurotransmitters that kick in when someone likes your post on Facebook, or so it's just a vehicle to the connection, but not the connection itself, I think is important to say.
Okay.
For me, the piece that I would add to that is slightly different, but not contradictory at all. And that I think what both of them are talking about is, on a certain level, you can understand the internet as a metaphor for the reality of consciousness around the world and the way that we're interconnected. The thing that I would say is, I really feel that the moment we're in has a certain kind of trajectory, and I really see it as the end of an era that's over masculine, and I use that term psychologically, and so that can be in men and women. But one of the things ways we see it played out is that switch we're going to from a hierarchical culture to a peer-to-peer culture. So, what that means is that there's nobody who's there to tell us what to think anymore. And I think we talked about this a little last time I was on, Michael, that, there's no Walter Cronkite around today that's going to interpret how you should feel and what your judgments should be about any particular issue. There's no central institutions that tell us what we should think, not compared to 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And, the masculine heroes are getting chopped down, whether it's, all the sports heroes that keep getting, disgraced. Every week a new one, whether it was, the University of Pennsylvania thing, or Lance Armstrong, or OJ, or, there's 100. But the sort of the hero worship of the masculine is ending. That we're seeing the death of the masculine idols, and we're seeing the end of, or the lessening of, these hierarchical systems and shifting to peer-to-peer. And that's all just happening in the zeitgeist. I mean, nobody's making that decision for that to happen. This is just a shift in the waves of reality. And I see it that way, and I see the internet as one of those, that, now we're more connected on a peer-to-peer way, and that's just a change of time, a change of era. It's in the wind,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, would you agree or disagree with the idea that information technology, the internet, and all that it's changed the way that we think and even treat others?
Well, absolutely. I think, what we've been discussing is it on one hand can make you feel a lot more dialed in and connected to people from all over the world, and being able to get your information directly from a person in Egypt at the protest rather than a news agency makes you feel more connected, right? But then on the other, I think it can have a negative effect, because we do see the phenomenon of, younger people sitting at a table together and texting each other instead of actually talking. So, I don't think it has, I think it's in and of itself a thing, and it's how it's employed and how it's utilized that determines whether it's influencing us positively or negatively. But I think it's changed how we think. I mean, we definitely have a lot more information coming at us. I think it's a little bit harder to manage all the information.
Yeah.
And yet it's nice to have more variety.
I would agree. And I got I don't know if it's such more of a question, but I got this from one of our listeners who said, this is not criticism about any of you and the upcoming symposium, but there is not one speaker, workshop, article, or video addressing the information age and how or if it is changing humanity. Can you each address why not, and if you think the information age is really not having an impact upon us for the good or bad? And I figured I'll get it that way rather than a call. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's one for me. I think, there's just, honestly, there's so many things that we could have included here that it's really difficult. And especially when an event like this gets out there, we get a lot of people that contact us and want to be a part of it and want to share what they have to say. So, there's no reason why that couldn't be a good topic. But there's so many things and so many different pieces here that we could fill out. I think in future years, we want to bring in somebody really to talk about plant consciousness, like the way we've been talking about it today, to talk about animal consciousness, to talk about near-death experience, to talk about Tantra. There's lots of areas here that would be really exciting to explore in future years. And there's no reason why, the role of information technology couldn't be a part of that. And I'm sure there's some really fascinating folks out there who could tell us something about that. There is one speaker I would say that for them to take a look at, which is Michael Jiao, who is doing a project called Synchronicity.net, where he's going to be using information technology to record people's synchronicities and share synchronicities, so that everyone that had a bird synchronicity in San Francisco on Tuesday, would have those would all be a blip on a map where we could see if are there are there ways that these meaningful dreams or synchronicities are coming together in patterns, you know. And I applaud him for doing that, and that's going to launch pretty soon. It's a project that's still in development, but really close to launching, and he is one of the speakers, and he's on the website there. So that's one little thing, but I think there's a lot of pieces we can explore in future years, and the key fabric here is just the way that we understand the, you know, psyche to be extended beyond the body, and the psyche and matter to be of one fabric.
I see. And you get a chance, check out iPredator.com, because there's a Dr. Michael Nuccitelli, and I'm not just plugging him because he's a friend or I work with iPredator, but it's a fascinating website, and gets into the consciousness of the psychopath and the evil from cyberspace, meaning like it almost opens up a portal. And some people, like, you know, if we're in person and we're not agreeing, we're going to disagree, probably respectfully. But on the internet, there's like this, it's like a whole nother world where people will just say whatever they want because they think there's no consequences. But really interesting, and he is, I know he's fascinated with the work that you all do, and I think it's somewhat on the same line. So you get a chance, check out iPredator.co. It is.
Okay.
So, but I want to give you all a chance to speak about anything you want these last few minutes. So each one of you want to take a couple minutes each, and anything you want to get out there. And I want to thank you so much for being guests on the show tonight and dealing with all our issues.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's still great.
I guess I'd just like to thank everyone for having me on. I'm really excited to be a part of this, and I can't wait to get out there and meet up with everyone. I think it's going to be a fantastic time. I can't wait to be able to speak with Dr. Sheldrake and Graham Hancock and all the other excellent speakers. It's going to be a fantastic time. I guess I would just encourage everyone to come see us there.
Okay.
And Gabriel, I have two questions for you before we go off. One, why don't you just tell folks briefly about your book, because you do interview Sheldrake and Hancock in your book. And number two would be, I want to know one question that you're going to ask the two of them when you're hosting the panel with them on Friday night.
All right. So my most recent book is called The Quest for Gnosis. It can be found at GabrielDRoberts.com. And in it, I cover basically spirituality without the confines of dogma, meaning the things that we all experience across the board, you know, things that all religions kind of try to appropriate to themselves, but reducing them to their core essence. And I discuss these matters with 20 of the great minds of our time, including Graham Hancock, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, Simon G. Powell, Dr. Lou Graham, Hamilton Morris, Crystal Cole, Dr. Rick Strassman, and on and on and on. Really amazing people, all illuminated in their field. And we discuss gnosis in the modern context, which is essentially experiential knowledge. So we're talking about taking away from the old paradigm where an authoritarian figure says this is the way you have to believe things, and taking responsibility for yourself and achieving gnosis, which is experiential knowledge. As far as questions go for Dr. Sheldrake and Graham Hancock, and that's a tough question, because I think I'm going to wait a little while for information on that matter, especially because there's so many things still unfolding. They're obviously very nicely tied together, especially because of the issue with the band's TED Talks and things like that. So I think that one of my first questions might have to do with the very things that we've been discussing here. The question of, you know, the body versus the mind, the role that the spirit or the soul plays in relation to our spiritual experiences and things like that. I want to talk about the nature of ecstatic states with them, whether they be through meditation and other practices, and I also want to discuss the influence of entheogens and psychedelics in the spiritual experience. So those things will be definitely things that I cover in the first round of questions.
All right.
Great. And hey, if any of you guys got any poll and you're speaking with Mr. Graham Hancock, I would love for you to pass him along my email, because I have been trying to get a hold of that man. But thank you. Anybody else?
Well,
Yeah, you go ahead, Gary.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Okay. I first of all just want to say, it's so delightful to be able to have this discussion with Gary and Gabriel and you, Michael, for the show, and just want to put out there that this symposium is a really wonderful opportunity just to talk about in the field with people who are just endeavoring to dial in, and great things can't help but happen when you just gather that many great minds and hearts and bodies together in one place.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so grateful to be sharing such wonderful folks as you, Shannon, and Gabriel with the audience and with the people coming to the symposium. And it's called the Synchronicity, Matter, and Psyche Symposium. And the website is Matter Psyche, MATTER, Psyche, PSYCHE.net. And we haven't mentioned Rick Tarnas, who's author of Cosmos and Psyche. He's going to be there talking about synchronicity for us, and Dr. Stephen Eisenstadt, who's the founding president of Pacifica Graduate Institute, who will be there talking about dreams, and that's a big aspect that we're going to get into there as well. And I'm just very grateful, and thank you, Michael, for having us for this wonderful conversation. And I'm grateful to be, here tonight with you guys, and I'm looking forward to September.
All right. Well, thank you all, and I appreciate the work you do. Please don't stop, because this is just fantastic stuff, and I hope that I could have you all back in the near future. And thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. That would be great.
Oh, and by the way, if you want to send me something on the symposium, I'd be glad to post something on the website for you.
Will do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all, and have a great night. And again, keep up the great work.
Thank you, Michael.
All right.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Good night. All right, everybody. There you have it. I really enjoyed tonight's show.